Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Northampton Senior Center on this beautiful Friday afternoon. Woo, all right. My name is Kim, and I'm the director here at the Senior Center. And again, I want to welcome you to the presentation today. This is a collaboration with Northampton Neighbors, and you'll be hearing from them in just one moment. But I did want to take a quick second to invite you to come and visit us anytime during the week. We serve some fabulous lunches 3 days a week, and we have some wonderful programs as well. So you're welcome to join us at any time. We'd be happy to see you. I'm going to introduce Sarah, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about Northampton Neighbors and introduce our speaker. And again, thank you so much for being with us today.
Who knew I'd be using my step, not for exercise, but to get some height. But it's for Fran. I don't need the height. My name is Sarah Backrack, and I'm part of Northampton Neighbors, the Speakers Committee. We have almost 1,800 members now. It's a wonderful organization, if I say so myself. There's no fees to join, no fees for any of the services, but you do have to be 55 years or older to get a service. That's about all I'm going to say. Our goal is helping all of us age in place and to stay connected with each other. Our next speaker is going to be December 6th, and it's going to be only by Zoom, so it won't be in person. It'll be Yael Yazlov. She's director of the program at Communities for Restorative Justice. The title is Making Right After Everything Goes Wrong, the Principles and Practices of Restorative Justice. So that'll be on the 6th by Zoom at 2 o'clock. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Francisca Kan. She was born in the Netherlands in 1937. She survived the years of the German occupation by staying in hiding. She emigrated to the U.S. in 1946. She went to high school and college in New York City. She married a Dutchman and became a mother of 3 and a grandmother of 5. She's also a professional painter, author, art teacher, and museum docent. And now I'll let Fran take over.
Thank you for having me. I'm a child survivor with a lot of feedback of the Holocaust. Today, the only Holocaust survivors still alive in the world are those of us who were children during those years. And people who learn about the Holocaust and what happened to the Jews of Europe during the German occupation often say, never again. Never again will Germany kill Jews. Never again will Hindus kill Muslims. Never again will white people kill black people. Never again will Catholics kill Protestants. Never again will Tutsis kill Hutus. Never again will the Taliban kill Hazara. Never again will China kill Uyghurs. Never again will Myanmar kill Rohingya. Never again will Turkey kill Armenians. Never again will Sunni and Shia kill each other. Never again will Americans kill Native people. Never again will Bosnians kill Serbians. Never again will the Khmer Rouge kill Cambodians. Never again will Russians kill Ukrainians. Never again will Palestinians and Israelis kill each other. Never again, never again, never, never again, and again, and again, and again. However, of all the genocide that has taken place over the centuries all over the world, only Germany turned killing into an industry. They created factories whose only purpose was the murder of human beings, most of them Jews, and that has made all the difference. When the war was over, it wasn't over for me. It's still not over. The relatives with whom I lived told me that, as a child, I was too young to remember. And in any case, children get over these things very quickly. Nothing happened to you. At one of the early gatherings of Holocaust survivors in Washington, D.C., someone asked me, "What camp were you in?" I replied, "I wasn't in a camp." "Oh, nothing happened to you." However, never underestimate children. No matter how young they are, they will always remember traumatic experiences. In the 1980s, I was interviewed by Milton Kestenberg, a lawyer born in Poland, who specialized in helping children, many of them too young to remember the details normally required for legal evidence. He and his wife, Judith, a psychoanalyst, founded the International Study of Organized Persecution of Children in the Holocaust. They also created the Association of Child Survivors to help them cope. My husband, Robert, and I joined the Washington, D.C. chapter of this worldwide support group in 1985. We were amazed and relieved to discover that there were others like us. It enabled us to come out of hiding at last. As Sarah said, I was born in 1937 in Hilversum, the Netherlands. My father was the director of a bicycle factory, which had been founded by my grandfather. If any of you have been to the Netherlands, you know there are a lot of bicycles there. I had an older sister and a younger brother. We had a comfortable life and lacked for nothing. On May 10th, Germany invaded the Netherlands. May 10th, 1940. On May 14, 1940, the Netherlands capitulated. Soon thereafter, the Germans instituted in the Netherlands the laws to rid Europe of all Jews and gypsies and homosexuals and those with disabilities and any others they deemed undesirable. In the beginning, it wasn't so bad. The noose tightened gradually. But by the spring of 1942, my father's factory and our home were confiscated. And we moved in with my paternal grandparents in Amsterdam. And that is all the time when everyone was required, every Jew was required to wear a yellow star. Homosexuals were required to wear a pink triangle. I don't know if they actually did, but that's what they were told to do. My parents realized that going into hiding was our only option. They made the unthinkable decision to split their 3 children up. So should one be discovered, the other 2 would still be safe. Imagine. Not until I myself became the mother of 3 in the early 1960s did I appreciate the tremendous sacrifice my parents made, giving their 3 very young children to total strangers, not knowing if they would ever see us again. We were placed in rural communities. My sister with the mayor of a small village in the south of the country. My brother with a large blended family in the Northeast, and I with a non-Jewish couple in a small resort town on the North Sea. I liked it there. There were 2 small, fluffy dogs and a large parrot in the house. I had a lot of freedom to roam the dunes, pick berries, etc. However, this too came to an abrupt end because the Germans feared an imminent invasion from the British, and they evacuated the entire coast along the North Sea to prepare for this invasion. Of course, we all know they invaded in France, in Normandy, but it wasn't, everybody was told to leave that town. It wasn't just me. The couple and I, we moved to Amsterdam. The couple, the dogs, the parrot, and I, into an available house from which the previous residents had been deported. It was right next door to a theater, which had been converted into a detention center for those who had been caught in the raids of their homes conducted after the 8 o'clock curfew on Jews. All night long, trucks pulled up in front of our house, dispensing the terrified people onto the sidewalk. And as my room was on street level, I heard the noise and peeked out the window and saw the crowds. I was hiding in plain sight, right under the noses of the Nazis. It might have been the safest place in all of Europe. Who would hide there? I had no idea what was going on. I was told nothing. Nothing was explained to me. Mind you, I was 5 years old. 5-year-old children do not know what they can and cannot say. And they'll say anything, so that's why I was told nothing. I had quite a bit of freedom to roam the streets by myself, visit a nearby zoo, collect shrapnel after a bombing, and so on. I was also often confused, sometimes mistreated, and yet it all seemed normal to me. Thus, I lived with this couple for 3 years until I was 8. The war years in Holland were terrible, and not just for Jews. The Germans stole everything. There was no electricity, no food, people froze and starved. Men between the ages of 16 and 40 were rounded up and sent to Germany as slave labor. These young men also, many of them went into hiding. This really gets me. Bells were removed from church steeples, sent to Germany, melted down, and made into ammunition. Finally, we were liberated. I personally, in Amsterdam, was liberated by Canadians. I have a great love for the, excuse me. I have a great love for that maple leaf flag. They came through the streets on their trucks. They picked us up, they gave us candy, and the best thing was to invite a soldier to your house. Oh, and they gave the grown-ups cigarettes. Big deal. So I've seen my children and grandchildren grow up. This is a miracle to me, one my parents never experienced. I survived not because I was brave or lucky. Bravery and courage or clever, or because I survived because I was one of the accidental few. Had it not been for the bravery and courage of those who refused to be bystanders, there would have been no Holocaust survivor to be found anywhere on earth. In one way or another, each one of us owes our life to the true heroes, the rescuers. Who were these people? I'll tell you. They were men and women from all the countries in Germany, in German-occupied Europe. They were young and they were old. They were urban and they were rural. They were Catholic and Protestant. They were educated and uneducated. They were sophisticated and simple. They were aristocrat and peasant, religious and atheist. They rescued at the risk of their own lives and that of their families. They did what is right for its own sake. They did not see themselves as heroes. They considered what they did as normal. Rescuers had strangers living in their homes for months, even years, as in my case, at great peril. These guests, so-called, were not always very nice, often difficult, even ungrateful. If one of them became ill or died, no doctor could be called. And what does one do with the body of someone who has died? They had to be buried at night in the garden. We owe them a debt of gratitude which can never be repaid, except by following their example. At our Passover table, you know, those of you who, I think you all know what Passover is. We sometimes discuss, why do we keep observing this and repeating this 5,000-year-old story year after year? Is it just a tradition? Or is it because it must never be forgotten? Elie Wiesel, I don't know how many of you know that name. He's a very important person who's no longer living, unfortunately, said, and I quote, "We have an obligation to bear witness. Remembering is our duty in order to prevent a recurrence, and therein lies our redemption. We have a mandate to teach, and even when the last survivor has died, the world must continue to remember. We still have a long way to go. Never again? No. Never forget. I threw my childhood away. I didn't want it anymore. It wasn't any good. But it came back. I gave my childhood away to someone who might need it. but no one wanted it, and I had to take it back. I ran away from my childhood and hid in faraway places, pretending to be someone else, but it followed me. So here we are at last, my childhood and I, unable to shake each other off. We will have to find ways to make peace. Thank you for inviting me to speak. And more than that, thank you for listening. I do have, I'll just show you, my sister and I, my sister lives in California. My mother was in prison camp in the Netherlands for a long while, before she was deported to Auschwitz, where she died at the age of 34. And I think I skipped that part in my talk. Here I thought I was finished. 1 second. You know, that's what happens when you get old. Well, I don't know. Anyway, when we came back together to Hilversum, my mother wasn't there anymore. She was murdered in Auschwitz. And she did write letters, which I had. And a lot of them were typewritten because she had a job in the prison camp as a secretary, and she was a good typist. And it occurred to me that if I died and my children found those letters, they would be tossed out because they can't read Dutch. So I had them translated, and my sister and I published a book called Signs of Life, and all of you Lathrop people, this is in the library at Lathrop, in case you're interested. It has, the original Dutch is also been published in the Netherlands, and I wrote a memoir which is not commercially published, privately published, and I have it in case, I think, John, you borrowed it once. Yes, you did. And that's all I have to say. Okay, thank you. So now this has to be turned off, right?
Now we're going to have question and answers, and so you may have more to say. I have to bring the speaker to you.
Okay.
We'll find out.
Did your brother and your father both survive?
All three of us children survived. And that was because my parents, yes, and my sister survived also. And they're both still living. And we're all, my sister's going to be 90 next week.
Other questions? Other questions?
No. Barbara, what's the question?
Talk a little bit more about the letters. How did they come to you? How did you make the decision with your sister to publish them? What did you learn from them?
This camp in the Netherlands was a transit camp. People were rounded up. There were several camps in the Netherlands, and this was Westerbork, and it was a transit camp. From there, people were deported to Auschwitz or Buchenwald or other camps in Germany and Austria, Poland. Auschwitz is in Poland. And she wrote these letters to my father, who was hidden. And they were carried out by couriers. This was not legal, of course, obviously, but they're very detailed. about life in this camp. And they were, how shall I say that? I'm going to say snuck out, but that's not exactly. They were taken out illegally, and they survived. My father had them, and then they came with him to America. He did come to America, and we all came to America, but then he died shortly after that. So they were just all over the place. They were not dated. There are very few names in those except initials or names that have been changed because you never knew if somebody was going to be taking these letters. So there were no names in the letters. And I had them, and we thought, well, we got to do something, otherwise they'll. And I was just going to be for the family. I took them to, we had them all, I had them professionally translated. My sister went over them and made corrections. We wanted my mother's voice to survive through these letters. I took them to a printer who called me up and said, "This is amazing. Do you mind if I showed them to a publisher friend of mine?" So I asked my sister, and she said, "No, that's fine." So that's how they got published. If any of you are writers, let me tell you, working with a publisher ain't no fun. Publishers are a business. They want a book that will sell. And after a while, they thought, this book is not going to sell. And they wanted this added, and that taken out, and it was a fight all to the finish. We're fairly happy with the product. The Dutch book was not as much of a fight. And the publisher in the Netherlands was a little more easier to deal with. So if you read Dutch, you can look at this book.
Other questions? Yeah, well, go ahead. Oh, hold on a second.
Did you stay in touch with the family that took you in?
I did. They had no children. They just had the dogs and the parrot. I did for a while. And I have to say, I was not well treated there. And when I started having my own children, I thought, how bad does a child have to be to merit the treatment that I received? And I did not get back in touch with them. I was treated like a criminal, but you know, they were in terrible danger. It was a terrible time. And after I became out of the closet, some of you can understand what that means. And I had friends in school, high school, college, who didn't know anything about me because I was totally still in hiding. But after I sort of came to terms with this, I started thinking, you know, they did save my life. I should try to find them. And they had both died. On the other hand, both my brother and sister were with families that had children, and now those children have children, and they are still very much in touch with their foster families.
Yeah. I have a question, and that is, when you were very isolated with this family who took you in, did you have any idea how many other children? Would you feel like you were like the only one?
I was from 5 to 8. I had no idea what was going on in the world, none whatsoever. As I said, I wasn't told anything, and I didn't really understand anything. I mean, it was a crazy time. And I took it all as normal. There were bombings. There were dead people lying on the street who died of starvation. I didn't think anything of it. That was my life. That was normal. I didn't think, there's a dead person there. It was commonplace. So, no, I did not. There was across the street from where I was hidden, and I do write about that in this memoir, which I only printed 15 of these, really just for the family. Across the street was a girls' school, and next to the girls' school was a kind of a store, and all the infants of the people who were in the theater were kept in that store, were taken care of. So they would sometimes ask the parents who were in the theater if it would be okay to take the children away. And they took them away. The girls from that school put them in their school bags or in their backpacks, rode off on their bicycles, and those children stayed with those families. So they were saved. What happened to them afterwards, I don't know, but I was fascinated with this store window full of babies. That was really something. I didn't know what was going on. I hadn't a clue.
Okay, I was born in Utrecht.
Where?
Utrecht. Yeah, I'm Dutch. I'm exactly your age, and I do not remember the beginning of the war, but I certainly remember things at 5. I lived in the middle of the city, and my father was in the underground. And so, there were 3 kids at that time. Well, I can tell you many stories also, but one of the things I want to question you about, I remember when we were liberated by the Canadians, and I was sitting on top of a tank and with my sister and got lots of chocolate. I was 8 years old. I was very impressed with the Canadian soldiers. However, you, as a child, being in a war, you are affected. I was. Absolutely. And one of the things today, at 87, I still, when it's thundering, I hate thunder and lightning. I turn all my lights on in the house, and because it reminds me of the bombs that fell on Utrecht. And because Utrecht was a big city, and we lived in the middle of the city, and behind, we had a hospital across the street, and behind the hospital was a railroad, which was constantly bombarded by the Germans, constantly, because the English, sometimes used, nobody English, because Germans used that railroad for transporting their goods. So yeah, I still live with what I experienced, 7 years ago?
Absolutely. Well, I told you there were perpetrators, there were victims, we know who they are. There were bystanders for whatever reason that they couldn't help out. But then there were collaborators, a lot of collaborators. People like your father didn't know who he could trust because there were also resistors. There was a very active resistance, and they did amazing things. They printed false identity cards.
My father had one. Because my father was bald at the age of 30, so his passport showed that he was 15 years older. So he was a big.
So he was excused from being deported. A lot of men in there between 16 and 40, I met a man who was dressed as a nun. You know, you did anything you could to stay out of the clutches of the Germans. It was very, thank you. Thank you. Don't you God.
Alsjeblieft.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Francesca. Your words are beautiful, and I'm so happy to hear your stories, particularly because you're still here with us. And as a Jew in 2024 here in the US, my question for you is, how did your creative spirit begin to unfold through the perhaps resilience that you were looking for or embodying? Because I've read about your artwork, and I thought it would be interesting to hear how that began as well.
Well, this is still working, isn't it?
Yes.
I got incredibly lucky. After my father died, when I was 10 years old, my remaining family who hadn't made it to the U.S. had long discussions of what to do with the three of us. My father had 3 sisters. His youngest sister and he were very close, and she, I am sure, promised him that she would always take care of us. However, her husband was not so crazy about that idea, and so we were split up again. My father would be turning over in his grave, as they say, if he had a grave. So we were split up again, and I'm not going to speak for my brother and sister, but I moved from family to family here in Yen, and I adapted to the rules of the house and became very neat, made my bed. And I did go to high school. I loved school because it was away from all the craziness. I went to a free in New York City, the City University of New York, if you know what that is. I went to Queens College, and I have a Queens College buddy here, yes, which was free, totally free. And then I married a Dutchman, and also he who escaped, and that changed my life. At that point, here was the first person since my parents who actually wanted me. And he continued to want me for 58 years. And that changed my life. Nothing like being wanted. And he did.
In Sarah's introduction, she mentioned that you are an artist and you've been very involved in different facets of art in your life. Do you want to say anything about the relationships between this childhood that has followed you around and making art?
Well, I have my last exhibit before I moved here in 22 was in Wilmington, Delaware. It was all the paintings that were part of this experience. Kind of had to come out in that way. And after my children went to college, I fulfilled a lifelong dream of going to art school. And I went to American University, and people say, oh, you're so talented. Well, no, I had a wonderful education. That's really what I'm thinking of. And I no longer paint because my hands shake, but I do a little sketching still, and I've become a knitter, right? A lot of my buddies are here. Making Sarah walk. I see a couple of knitters here. Oh, there's one. There's one right there.
Well, I want to thank you for a wonderful story, but I'm curious And I'm curious about once the Canadians, you were liberated by the Canadians, how were you reunited with your father or your siblings?
Okay, so then it was after May 5th, 1945. The war was officially over, not in the Pacific, of course. And I went to school for the first time. I'd never been to school because I didn't have proper identification papers. So I went to school, which was amazing. I've always loved school since then. And eventually, my father knew where I was. He knew where all three of us were. And he came. The first person to find me was a cousin who was about 20, maybe 18. He had managed to survive. Teenagers do, because they don't have any responsibilities for anybody, and he managed to survive. And he came up to me on the street and called me by name. Well, I was terrified of strangers, so I ran away. And then one day the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there was a strange man standing out there who turned out to be my father. So he knew where I was. And that was an odd experience, but he knew where I was, and he came and rang the bell. Turned out to be my father. But after 3 years, I didn't remember him. Oh, thank you, that's so nice. I'm all right.
Other questions?
Oh.
Sorry to make you walk again. Thank you so much for your sharing your story, Francesca. It's very powerful and wonderful to hear from you. I had a question. You mentioned so many times about how, as a child, things for the most part that were going on felt normal to you. I was just wondering at what age did you realize the significance of what you had lived?
It took a while. I mean, I now know that history was not very kind to me, and to, I don't know. At the time, I don't really, I was scared. I know I was a bad child. I was told I was a bad child, so children believe what they're told. And if you're told often enough that you're bad, then you're bad. That's all there's to it. And it took, I think, when I joined this group, this Association of Child Survivors of the Holocaust, the first time we met, someone called me. It was a Dutch woman with whom I became great friends. She said, I'm so-and-so, and I'm calling for this and this. What was my response? Where did you get my name? That terror was still there. How did you get my name? Because I was always afraid that somebody would find out who I really was. It's being still in hiding. Being in the closet, that's what we say in America. And you know what that's about. And then I had this interview with this lawyer, and he kept asking me questions, and I kept saying, I don't remember, I don't know, I can't remember. And finally he turned off the tape recorder and said, I've done recordings, interviews all over the world. What do you think is the most common answer I get? And he said, I can't remember. We were taught not to remember. because that was dangerous. We were told not to remember. And so at that point, when I joined that group and I heard other people talk, there were 8 of us at that first meeting. Now it's a huge group. And I heard all these stories, and I thought, holy smokes, there are actually other people who went through the same experience. Isn't that amazing? And there was a huge meeting in Amsterdam, I forget the exact year, of child survivors. And it was a big meeting of children who were hidden children in the Netherlands that included the mayor of Amsterdam at that time, who made a beautiful speech. And that kind of slowly but surely brought it out. And now I can't shut up about it.
Well, I'm happy that's how you were approaching their whole life, is letting all of us know.
Well, people tell me I am very positive. I am very optimistic. Even today, we won't talk about what, but even today, after all that happened this week, I'm still optimistic.
We do have a few more minutes. Are there any last questions? Sure.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I have a lot of questions. One has to do with what organization was behind your being placed with the family you were placed with?
Yes, that was a resistance organization. And there have been a lot of books written about it. One of them is a man, I have that book, it's been translated into English, whose job in the resistance was to find places to hide people. One reason someone made me aware of this book is that my father is written about in that book in several places. My father was one of these difficult people. He couldn't get along. Well, of course, he had a million things on his mind. He's lost his factory, he's lost his family, and he is in danger of his life. And he also was head of a big factory, and he was not used to being in that situation. And he was considered difficult. And they had to keep moving him because he couldn't get along. And he spent some time under a church. And so this man whose job it was to find these homes kept a diary. There is nothing more dangerous than keeping a diary with names and addresses so he could keep track of where his people were. He put his diary into jars with his top and buried them in his garden. And then, after the war, he dug them up, and it was turned into a book. It's absolutely fascinating. So these were, again, very brave people, but they could not trust anyone. You never knew whose side your neighbor was on, or who would give you away, and it was very risky. And as your father must have told you, extremely dangerous. And a lot of the Jewish people who were hidden in the countryside were city people. They didn't have farms. They were city people. They didn't know how to dress. They wore suits and ties. We don't wear a suit and a tie, you wear overalls when you're in a farming community. And they were told not to go outside. Well, sometimes they did go outside because they were stubborn. And, Netherlands is a very, very flat country. You can see for miles. If somebody's walking around, you can see them pretty far away. So these people who were difficult and put people in danger.
Do you have another question, sir, or are you all set?
I'll come and speak with you privately.
Okay, I want to thank you. This has been a most amazing conversation. Thank you.